Okay, let me ask you a question. When a child or a student acts out, what's your immediate instinct? If you're like most of us, your instinct is to just reach for a hammer. And by hammer, I mean a traditional punishment. But what if that hammer isn't actually fixing anything? What if, especially for our most vulnerable young people, that hammer is literally driving the nail in the wrong direction and making things so much worse? Abraham Maslow famously said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. Well, today, we're going to look at exactly why it is time to completely upgrade our toolbox. Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are diving into some really incredible source material from clinical psychologists and behavioral experts, and our goal is to completely shift the paradigm on how we handle challenging behavior. We're going to break down the actual science behind why kids do what they do and figure out how we can stop punishing just to control and start consequencing to actually teach. So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start off with the punishment paradigm, unpack the ABCs of behavior, explore why punitive approaches fail, look at trauma and behavior, and then we'll wrap up with natural and logical consequences. All right, Section 1, the punishment paradigm, a societal instinct. Let's get into it. So, you might recognize that famous movie line, your punishment must be more severe. It's kind of funny, right? But honestly, it perfectly captures our cultural mindset. We are deeply, deeply conditioned to believe that a consequence absolutely has to equate to a severe, painful punishment. If the bad behavior doesn't stop right away, our immediate thought is usually, well, I guess the punishment just wasn't harsh enough. We totally equate suffering with learning. But as we're about to see, the data tells a completely different story. On a macro level, the sources are pretty blunt. We basically have a punishment addiction problem. Just look at these statistics. They are staggering. The US has only 4.4% of the global population, right? Yet we house 22% of the world's prisoners. On top of that, 82% of juvenile offenders are school dropouts, and our whole correction system, it costs $74 billion every single year. So the bottom line here is this. If a highly punitive, controlling approach actually worked, we would have the most perfectly behaved society on Earth. But we don't. Relying on that hammer is failing on a massive systemic scale. Moving on to Section 2, the ABCs of behavior, mechanics of actions. What's really fascinating here is how beautifully simple the science of behavior actually is. It all comes down to an ABC model. A is for antecedent. That's just whatever happens right before the behavior. B is the behavior itself, the actual action. And C is the consequence. Now pay close attention to this part, because this is where everyone gets tripped up. A consequence is simply what happens after a behavior. That's it. It is not necessarily a punishment. The way we respond to behavior, the consequence we provide, can either increase or decrease the chances of that behavior happening again. I absolutely love using a bit of pop culture to explain these four quadrants of behavioral science. Okay, so in behavioral terms, reinforcement means the behavior is going to increase. Punishment means the behavior will decrease. Now, positive just means we are adding something into the mix, and negative means we're taking something away. Think about it like this. If you give a student a good grade for studying, you've added something they like. That's positive reinforcement. Cue the woohoo! If you take away their chores because they did great on a test, you've removed something they hate. That's negative reinforcement, a big phew. On the flip side, if you add something they hate, like writing sentences 100 times, that's positive punishment. Ouch. And if you take away something they love, like their recess time, that's negative punishment. Doh. Understanding this grid, it's basically the secret decoder ring for all human behavior. Section 3, why punitive approaches fail, the reactive trap. There's this classic joke where a kid gets suspended and says, school is the only place in the world where you can get time off for bad behavior. And you know what? That is the trickiest part of behavior science. There's literally no such thing as a universal punisher. What adults think is a harsh punishment, like sending a kid to the principal or suspending them, might actually be a massive reward for them. If a student hates the class or just wants to show off for their friends in the hallway, kicking them out gives them exactly what they want. They're being negatively reinforced by escaping the work. We think we're punishing them, but we're actually rewarding the exact behavior we want to stop. And that brings us right to the reactive trap. Why are we so drawn to punishment? Well, because it feels like it works quickly. A harsh yell or a loud threat might suppress problem behavior for a minute, maybe for 80 to 90% of kids. The adult feels better because the room got quiet. But it is a total trap. Our sources point out that punitive approaches completely fail to teach any replacement life skills.
Plus, for the 10 to 20% of students dealing with chronic behavior issues, we're basically punishing them for a skill they don't even have yet, which just wrecks their emotional health. And the absolute worst part? The child starts to associate that awful feeling of punishment directly with the educator or the school. They aren't learning responsibility, they're just learning to resent you.
Let's look at Section 4, Trauma and Behavior, a critical lens.
Now, this part is absolutely crucial. We have to understand complex trauma. A lot of our young people presenting with complex trauma have been exposed to early environments full of abuse or neglect. They never learned that their thoughts, their feelings, or their behaviors result in a consistent, predictable response from the world. Because of that, they are hypersensitive to even the slightest bit of criticism. A traditional punishment doesn't teach them a helpful lesson. It triggers this profound, deep shame, which they just interpret as total rejection. Think about it. If a child already believes, deep down, I deserve to be punished because I'm inherently bad, handing down a harsh punishment just reenacts that past trauma. It just confirms their absolute worst fears about themselves. So how do we actually get through to them? Enter the PACE framework. This stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Before you can ever hope to correct a behavior, you absolutely must connect. You have to accept how the young person is feeling right then and there. You use curiosity to figure out what's really driving the behavior under the surface instead of just reacting to the mess they made. And you use empathy to show that you genuinely care. Listen, you cannot deliver an effective consequence if you're furious, because an angry adult is just going to trigger intense emotional dysregulation in a traumatized child. Connection has to come before correction, every single time.
Section 5, Natural and Logical Consequences. Consequence versus punish.
So, if we're putting down the hammer, what do we use instead? There are two highly effective, non-punitive methods that actually work. First step, natural consequences. These are totally unplanned outcomes. If a teenager decides to stay up until 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the natural consequence is they're going to be exhausted the next day. You don't even have to yell. The world just naturally teaches that lesson. But obviously, sometimes natural consequences aren't safe or they aren't immediate enough. That's when we step in with logical consequences. These are planned by adults, but they mirror real life. For example, if a kid throws something in anger and breaks a TV screen, the logical consequence is that they can't watch TV, and they need to do chores to help repair that damage. It's about cause and effect. It is not about making them suffer. Now, to make sure your logical consequence isn't just a sneaky punishment in disguise, you want to use this checklist. The 3 R's. Number 1, it has to be related to the behavior. If a teen is texting while driving, taking the phone away is related. Grounding them from football practice? Not related. That's just a punishment. Number 2, it must be respectful. You don't shame them, you don't blame them, and you definitely discuss it in private. Number 3, it needs to be reasonable. It should be time-limited. Don't give them some open-ended ban where they just feel totally hopeless. There always needs to be a clear, achievable path to earn that trust back. Let's look at a really concrete comparison here. A traditional punishment sounds exactly like this. You're staying in from recess today because you were too loud in the hallway. The adult is just taking away something the kid loves to make them hurt a little. But look at the logical consequence on the other side. Hey, I think you forgot how to walk down the hall appropriately, so we need some extra practice. The only time we have to practice is during your recess. Do you see the shift there? The consequence is directly tied to the missing skill. You're not focused on payback, you're focused on taking the time to teach them the right way to act. It completely shifts you from being this vengeful enforcer to being a helpful coach. Game changer, right? Which brings us to our final, really provocative question. I want you to think deeply about your day-to-day interactions with the young people in your life. When rules get broken, and they will, are you punishing just to establish control? Or are you consequencing to actually teach? Our ultimate goal here shouldn't be forcing compliance through fear. It should be helping kids see the real connection between their actions and the outcomes so they develop genuine self-responsibility. We really have to put down the hammer. We have to stop punishing kids for skills they don't have yet and start doing the hard, beautiful work of actually teaching them. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you take these tools, apply those 3 R's, and just watch how your relationships transform. Catch you next time.